Christmas Eve should have felt warm, safe, sacred. But instead, my own living room had turned into enemy territory. "You're a freeloader," my son spat across the dinner table. The very table I'd bought, polished, and prepared with my own hands. His words echoed like a slap, sharper than the December wind that had stung my face all evening. And there he sat, under my roof, living off my pension, feeding off my groceries, hurling insults as though I were the intruder. His wife, Stella, nodded in cold agreement, her eyes glittering with that silent brand of cruelty that doesn't need words. My guests froze, their forks suspended midair, waiting for me to break. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled calmly and set down my glass. "You have until morning to leave," I told them. The words slid out smooth, measured, final. For a moment, silence pressed down heavier than the snow outside. The next morning, the police came knocking. But rewind a few hours. The front door had clicked shut behind me as I stepped out of the icy night, my boots still dusted with melting snow. Dylan's voice cut through the warm glow of the Christmas lights before I'd even had the chance to remove my coat. Finally showed up. "Thought you got lost in your book sorting again." There he was, sprawled across my leather recliner like a king on his throne, phone screen reflecting the twinkling tree lights, thumb scrolling endlessly. He didn't even glance up. 8 months of this, 8 months of coming home to find him draped in my chair, using my house as if it were his by right. While I tiptoed around like a guest, I hung my coat carefully in the hall closet, snow dripping onto the hardwood, and tried to shake off the bite of December. The library shift had run long. Mrs. Henderson had needed help processing the holiday returns, and though my bones ached, I'd hurried home for Christmas Eve, eager for a quiet night. "Good evening," I said softly, stepping into the living room, adjusting my sweater. "How are preparations for tomorrow going?" From the kitchen archway, Stella appeared, a dish towel dangling from her hand. She didn't face me. Her blonde hair was pulled back tight, her posture deliberately stiff. She looked more like a college girl pretending at adulthood than the 32-year-old woman who had been occupying my home since April. "We'll handle tomorrow ourselves," she said. The words landed sharp, dismissive. Dylan echoed her in that same clipped tone. "Don't need your help." The fireplace crackled behind him, shadows dancing across the garland I had strung, the stockings I had hung, the nativity set my late wife Margaret had collected piece by piece. Everything in that room had been placed by my hands. Everything, except the people now trying to erase me from it. "Everything's under control," Stella added without turning, her voice flat as a sheet of ice. Control. What an interesting choice of word. I wondered quietly whose control she meant. "The Smiths are excited about tomorrow," Dylan went on, finally lifting his eyes from his phone. "Mary's bringing her famous potato salad." The words struck me cold. The Smiths? Tomorrow? I hadn't heard of any plans involving guests. "I wasn't aware we were having company," I said carefully. He raised his eyebrows in mock surprise. "Oh, didn't we mention it? Yeah, John and Mary are coming. And Anne from next door. Tom from my old job too. Just a few people." He waved a hand as if brushing away my objection, already turning back to his glowing screen. My hand tightened around a silver ornament I'd been straightening on the tree. Just a few people. In my house, at my table, drinking my wine, eating food bought with my pension, leaving their fingerprints all over Margaret's dishes. "When did this get decided?" I asked, though I already knew. "Last week sometime." Dylan shrugged, indifferent. "Stella sent out the invites. You were probably at the library." Of course, the library. They knew my schedule. They knew when I would be gone. They'd planned this in the quiet spaces of my absence. The tree lights blurred as I stared at them. Red, green, gold colors meant for warmth and celebration. Yet tonight they glowed like warning signals, like trespass lights. My home had become unrecognizable. Its joy hijacked. "How many people, exactly?" I asked, though my voice had gone low. "6, maybe 7, Stella replied at last, still with her back turned. Nothing fancy, nothing fancy, nothing fancy about taking my home, my holiday, my dignity. Nothing fancy," Stella had said. Nothing fancy, except the fancy groceries that had begun appearing in my refrigerator all week. Bottles of wine I hadn't bought, labels I couldn't even pronounce, a turkey that cost more than I usually spent on an entire week's food, premium cuts of meat, name-brand cheeses, chocolates stacked in glossy packaging. My kitchen counter had become a display for luxuries I never would have wasted money on, and yet here I was, footing the bill. Dylan stretched in my recliner, his legs thrown arrogantly across the coffee table I'd refinished last spring. That table still bore the marks of my careful work, the sanded edges, the varnished shine. Now it also bore fresh water rings from glasses he never bothered to use coasters for. Each mark was like a scar across my effort. "Don't worry, old man, we've got it handled." Old man, he repeated the phrase casually, but the second time it landed different, heavier, like a stone in my chest. Old man, as though 65 meant useless, as though retired meant irrelevant. This was still my home, wasn't it? My life? My rules? Or had I already lost all that without noticing? I turned toward the Christmas tree, straightening another ornament, the way I'd always done when my hands needed purpose. This one was a small wooden angel, painted years ago by Margaret, her brushstrokes still visible, delicate, patient, precise. The memory of her hands, careful and kind, hit me harder than Dylan's words. She would have welcomed unexpected guests with grace. She would have smiled, made magic from the mess. But Margaret wasn't here. She hadn't been for 4 years, and I wasn't her. I couldn't conjure warmth out of cold betrayal. "Well," I said quietly, almost to myself, "I suppose I should get out of your way then." "Good idea," Dylan muttered, already back to his phone, face lit by its glow rather than the firelight. I lingered for one more heartbeat, taking in the sight, my son sprawled like a king, my daughter-in-law commanding my kitchen like a general, my home transformed into a stage for people who treated me like a background extra. Then I turned toward the stairs. Each creak beneath my weight carried me further from the life happening downstairs, and closer to the only refuge left to me. Behind me, Stella's voice drifted upward, something about tablecloths and seating charts. Dylan's dismissive reply followed. I let the bedroom door click shut, shutting them out, shutting myself in. For a moment, I kept my hand on the knob, listening to the muffled life downstairs, the crackle of the fire, the faint clatter of dishes. Life in my house lived without me. I removed my shoes, setting them neatly beside the bed, and lowered myself into the reading chair by the window. Outside, snow continued to fall, soft, endless, each flake briefly caught in the glow of the streetlight before vanishing into the dark. Across the street, the Johnsons' house blazed with Christmas spirit, every window trimmed with lights, every bush wrapped in color, an inflatable Santa bobbing stiffly in the wind. Their house looked alive. Mine felt like a mausoleum. I slid open the desk drawer, the wood groaning against wood. Inside were the things I rarely touched: retirement papers, bills, the old photo albums Margaret had so carefully organized. She'd loved doing that, labeling, preserving, arranging every memory with precision. I lifted the first album and opened it. Our wedding day, Margaret radiant in her lace dress, me in a borrowed suit, both of us grinning like we'd stolen the stars. We'd won something no money could buy. Page after page unfolded our life. Dylan at 6 months, chubby hands reaching for the camera. Dylan in blanket forts, in this very room. Dylan at graduation with his cap askew, pride glowing in his face. Margaret had captured it all, preserving a boy who once had a spark. But then I reached the photo that froze me. Dylan at 25, the night he'd called me. His voice electric with joy. "Dad, I did it. I'm finally getting somewhere." He'd just landed the assistant manager position at the furniture store. He'd been proud then, ambitious, hungry for more. Where was that man? Where had he gone? The one who saved for Stella's ring, who worked double shifts, who dreamed of building instead of borrowing. 8 months ago, Dylan had shown up with 2 suitcases and a story about temporary setbacks. Just for a couple weeks. Dad, until we're back on our feet. Laid off in March. Stella's hours cut. Credit cards maxed. The truck, the dinners out, the little luxuries that added up to ruin. And me? I'd said yes, because that's what you do. You help family. You always help family. But help had turned into a crutch, a lifestyle, a takeover. Downstairs something thudded. Stella's voice sharp, Dylan's response muffled but dismissive. The same tone he'd used on me, the same tone he'd worn like a crown for months. I closed the album and slid it back into the drawer. My hand found the small notebook tucked beside it. Margaret used to tease me about it, my lists, my numbers, my need to calculate everything. You engineer the grocery shopping, Jasper. She'd laugh, but numbers didn't lie. Utility bills up 37%. Groceries doubled. Water usage tripled. Thanks to Stella's hour-long showers and Dylan's constant use of the dishwasher. Last week, I'd glimpsed his credit card bill left carelessly on the counter. Hundreds spent at the mall. Electronics. Designer clothes. While I clipped coupons and bought generic, my son spent my roof, my pension, my sacrifice on toys. I flipped through the notebook, page after page of evidence. 8 months of depletion, of watching my life erode under their weight. And in that quiet room, snow falling, Margaret's photo smiling faintly from the album, something inside me hardened. Dylan had mistaken kindness for weakness. He thought my patience infinite, my love unconditional, my resources endless. He was wrong, very wrong. The bedroom felt smaller that night, as though the walls had crept closer under the weight of realization. My sanctuary had become a hiding place, my own home reduced to a refuge from people who should have been grateful, should have been humble, should have remembered whose roof they lived under. Instead they plotted, planned, consumed, while I withdrew into the shadows like an unwelcome guest. Outside, snow kept falling in thick, steady sheets, blanketing the world in silence. Across the street, the Johnsons' inflatable Santa waved endlessly, cheerfully, to no one at all. In other houses, families were gathering around trees, finishing last touches, carrying with them the kind of anticipation that Christmas Eve was meant to hold. I had none of that. Instead, I was sitting in the dim light of my bedroom, calculating the cost of my own kindness. The house quieted as the night deepened, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that brings peace. It was the quiet before a storm. Heavy, waiting, coiled. I changed into my pajamas, brushed my teeth, performed the small rituals I had clung to since Margaret's death. Routine had once saved me, kept grief from swallowing me whole. But tonight, routine felt like surrender, like I was acknowledging that I had been pushed to the margins of my own life. The bed welcomed me, but sleep stayed away. I lay there listening, footsteps across the floor, cabinets opening, the refrigerator humming open and shut. Dylan and Stella were still awake, still arranging their spectacle, still plotting their holiday on my dime. Tomorrow strangers would sit at my table, clink glasses filled with my wine, eat food purchased with my savings. A show of family happiness, staged in a house where the real family bond had long since broken. The snow tapped gently against the window, and in that rhythm I heard something else. A countdown. When morning came, it came with clattering pans and running water. I woke without an alarm. After 40 years as an engineer, my body still kept its own clock. The window framed a yard, covered in pristine white, rabbit tracks the only disturbance. I dressed and moved into the hallway, warmed by the activity below. Stella's voice carried upward, bright and animated, more lively than I'd ever heard her. Told them 7 sharp. Yes, Mary. I know your potato salad needs to chill. Just bring it whenever. She was orchestrating it all, commanding her guest list, her kitchen, my home. I stepped into the kitchen doorway and stopped. The scene looked more like preparations for a banquet than a family Christmas dinner. Stella stood at the stove, phone pressed between shoulder and ear, one hand basting a turkey the size of a small boulder, the other stirring something in a pot. The counters were buried beneath dishes I didn't recognize. Crystal bowls, silver platters, folded cloth napkins fresh from their packaging. My dining room table, once bare oak, now hid beneath a cream cloth I'd never seen before, set with china I hadn't touched since Margaret's funeral. "Good morning," I said. She glanced over her shoulder, barely pausing. "Morning, coffee's fresh." I moved closer, my eyes sweeping the table. 8 place settings glimmered under the chandelier. Plates, silverware, wine glasses, everything arranged with precision. I counted again. 8. Not 6 or 7, as Dylan had claimed. 8. "Stella," I asked evenly, "how many people did you invite?" Dylan handled the invitations, she said without turning, now fussing with a basket of 3 different breads, as though she were opening a restaurant. I counted again. 8 plates, 8 glasses, 8 seats. My table transformed into something unrecognizable. "It would have been nice to know the exact number," I murmured. "It's Christmas," she replied briskly. "Friends are coming." Friends, that's what she called them. The refrigerator revealed more evidence of their indulgence. 2 expensive wine bottles, a cheese platter wrapped in plastic, shrimp arranged neatly on a tray, vegetables stacked in bundles, asparagus tied with twine, baby potatoes polished to a shine, ingredients for fresh cranberry sauce, instead of the canned one Margaret had always used. Everything screamed cost, extravagance, display. Dylan shuffled in from the living room, hair messy, wearing yesterday's clothes. He didn't greet me. He went straight to the coffee pot, pouring into my favorite mug, the blue ceramic one Margaret had given me on my 60th birthday. "Your mother and I used to cook Christmas dinner together," I said to his back. "Simple meal, just family." "Well," Dylan muttered, sipping, "this isn't just family anymore." He gestured loosely, as though the point were obvious. "We thought you'd want to celebrate properly." Properly, as though the quiet Christmases Margaret and I had cherished were somehow inadequate. "Who exactly is coming?" I asked. He rattled off names without thought. John and Mary Smith, Ann from next door, Tom Brown and his girlfriend Lisa, maybe Rick if he's not working. Then as an afterthought, "Oh, and Stella's sister might drive down from Cleveland." I counted again. 8, 9. What had been sold to me as a few people had now become nearly a dozen. A party, a spectacle, funded by me. "This seems like quite an undertaking for a casual Christmas dinner," I said. Stella finally turned, wooden spoon in hand, her face flushed from the oven's heat. "We wanted to do something special, show people how grateful we are for," she gestured vaguely around my kitchen. "For everything." Grateful, that word again, hollow on her lips. "The turkey alone must have cost $60, I said. "We wanted quality," Dylan replied, bristling. "You always taught me not to cut corners." Yes, I had taught him that. When it came to work, to craftsmanship, to building things to last. Not when it came to raiding someone else's savings for a performance of generosity. The kitchen timer chimed, and Stella spun back to the oven, pulling out a tray of homemade rolls. The smell filled the room, warm, rich, undeniably magnificent, and yet all I tasted was bitterness. The smell of yeast and butter lingered thick in the air, warm enough to belong in some glossy magazine spread about family Christmases. Only this one wasn't mine. "What time are people arriving?" I asked, though I already dreaded the answer. "Around 2, Dylan said, casual as ever, as if he hadn't hijacked my home, my holiday, my peace. That gave me 5 hours. 5 hours until my quiet refuge would be invaded by strangers. 5 hours until my living room, once the sacred space where Margaret and I shared laughter, quiet dinners, and the kind of silence only old love understands, would be reduced to a stage. A stage for Dylan and Stella's little theater of domestic success, built on my roof and my money. I poured myself another cup of coffee, careful to avoid the blue mug Dylan had stolen earlier, and retreated to the living room. My Christmas tree seemed smaller now, swallowed up by the folding chairs dragged from the basement, and lined up in a half-circle like spectators waiting for a show. Even my reading chair, my one reliable corner of comfort, had been shoved against the wall. From where I sat, I could see them through the kitchen doorway. Stella bustling with the energy of a general at war, Dylan opening bottles of wine to let them breathe, both of them moving in a rhythm that excluded me entirely. When had they planned this? How many whispered conversations had happened while I sat upstairs, naive, alone? The phone rang, and Dylan's voice filled the house with false cheer. "Merry Christmas." "Yes, everything's on schedule. Can't wait to see you." His tone was so polished it made my stomach turn. I sipped my coffee in silence, surrounded by all the evidence that my own holiday had been stolen and repackaged. The day stretched out before me, an endless performance I'd never auditioned for, me cast as the silent benefactor while my life savings funded their grand production. Outside, snow blanketed the neighborhood in a hush that mocked me with its serenity. By the time the doorbell rang at 6 sharp, I felt like a prisoner rehearsing the last moments of freedom. Straightening my sweater, I walked to the door and saw 2 bundled figures through frosted glass. My hand lingered on the knob, heavy with hesitation, before I turned it. "Jasper!" Mary Smith's voice burst out like a carol. She beamed at me, her arms full of a covered dish and a bottle wrapped in festive paper. Behind her, John stomped snow from his boots. "What a wonderful home. Thank you for inviting us." The words hit me like a slap. Thank you for inviting us. My own house, my own door, and yet the gratitude was directed at a fiction Dylan had spun. I forced a smile, stepping aside. "Of course. Please come in." I hung their coats in the hall closet, the same closet I'd organized decades ago, back when Margaret and I filled this house with our life, not their theater. As I carefully aligned their jackets beside my own, I couldn't help but feel like a guest in what had once been mine. Mary's voice carried from the living room. "Oh, it smells absolutely divine. Stella must be an amazing cook." I followed her in, my eyes flicking across the room I'd built over 30 years. Margaret's embroidered pillows still sat neatly on the couch. My books, my glasses, our ornaments, all markers of my existence, now used as props. "Actually," I said quietly, "Stella does the cooking." The doorbell rang again. Ann Wilson stood outside, cheeks rosy, a plate of sugar cookies balanced in her hands. "Merry Christmas, dear," she said, stepping in without hesitation, the comfort of a longtime neighbor. "I brought your favorite. Dylan said you loved these." Dylan said, the words tightened in my chest. Since when did my preferences belong in his mouth? Guests trickled in until the living room buzzed with coats, boots, and chatter. Tom Brown showed up last, grinning and carrying a case of beer. "Dylan, you've got a beautiful place here," he shouted toward the kitchen. My name wasn't even on his lips. "Thanks for having me." I moved among them like a ghost, pouring wine from bottles I had bought, opening drawers I knew by memory. Every action screamed of ownership, yet each smile, each compliment painted Dylan as the host. "You've decorated so beautifully for Christmas," Mary said, glass in hand. "These ornaments look like family heirlooms." "They are," I replied, the truth escaping before I could swallow it down. John studied the family photos lining the mantel, his brow furrowing. "How long have you and Dylan lived here together?" The question hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Every eye in the room turned toward me, waiting for a confirmation that would cement Dylan's lie or an admission that would expose it. "Well," I paused, my throat dry. "It's complicated." Before the silence could deepen, footsteps thundered down the stairs. Dylan appeared, freshly showered, crisp shirt clinging like a badge of borrowed success. His grin stretched wide as he boomed, "Sorry I'm late. Hope Dad's been taking good care of you." Dad, not Jasper. Not the man whose money bought this house, whose sweat built this life. No, just Dad, the sidekick, the supporting role. Ann's laugh rang out. "Oh, Jasper's been wonderful. Such a gracious host. Me the host in name only, in the home that no longer felt mine." The silence stretched until it was unbearable, thick enough to choke on. I could feel every pair of eyes fixed on me, 8 witnesses waiting, hungry for my response, as though my humiliation were part of the evening's entertainment. Dylan loomed at my side, chest puffed with a counterfeit authority he had stitched together from arrogance and borrowed confidence. He looked like a guard, like a child pretending to be a king. Mary reached across the table, her hand grazing his sleeve, her voice low, careful. "Dylan, please, it's Christmas. Maybe this isn't." He jerked his arm away, shaking her off like a mosquito. "No, he needs to know his place." His voice cracked sharp, jagged. I sat frozen in my chair, every nerve humming, while John's chair creaked as he leaned back, diplomacy flickering across his face. "Son," he began, measured, firm, "he's your father, a father who doesn't deserve respect." Dylan snapped, raising his voice loud enough to rattle the crystal stemware. The walls that had heard 40 years of laughter, arguments, prayers, and Margaret's gentle humming, now carried the echo of his venom. Anne shifted in her seat, eyes wide, hands clasped, her grandmotherly concern pouring into the space. "Dylan," she said softly, "this is making everyone uncomfortable." He whirled on her, voice dripping with righteous indignation. "He's made me uncomfortable for months." His gaze swept across the table like a lawyer addressing a jury. "Every single day I come home, and there he is, sitting in my living room, reading my books, watching my television, acting like he owns the place." The words stabbed deep. My living room, my books, my television. Each pronoun landed like a slap, as though with every syllable he was erasing me, repainting my existence with his name on it. Across the table, Tom Brown set his beer down with deliberate slowness, the clink of glass against wood echoing like a verdict being read. "Maybe we should head out," he muttered, glancing around. "Don't leave because of him." Dylan's voice cracked, desperation leaking through the bravado. He raised his arms, pleading with his jury. "This is our dinner party, our house, our life." But Mary's eyes narrowed. She wasn't convinced. She was studying me now. My posture, the way I fit this house like skin, the instinctive familiarity with every object. "Jasper," she said, voice cutting through the noise, "whose house is this?" The question hung heavy, sharp as a blade. Dylan flushed, his lips twitching. "We all live here together. It's complicated." "No," Mary said, firmer this time. "It isn't complicated. Whose name is on the deed?" His throat bobbed. That doesn't matter." His voice faltered. For the first time all evening the mask slipped. John rose slowly, his frame towering, lending gravity to his words. "Dylan, you called your father a freeloader in what looks very much like his own home on Christmas Day. You don't understand." Dylan's shout rang raw, edges fraying. "He acts like some generous patriarch, but he controls everything, every penny, every decision, every breath of our lives." I sat still, hands folded, letting the room decide which voice carried truth. Dylan's hysteria filled the space like smoke, while my silence stood tall and unyielding. "Controls everything," he repeated, as if the words themselves were proof. "While we've been trying, me and Stella, to get back on our feet, he keeps us like children." Anne's voice cut clean through his tantrum, calm, stern, maternal. "No, you're acting like children. And grown adults," she said, each word landing heavy, "should pay their own way." The words hit him like a slap, his face twisting with rage, his fists clenched. "Don't you lecture me. You don't know what it's like." Mary leaned forward, eyes flashing. "I know what respect looks like, and this isn't it." His finger shot out, trembling, aimed at my chest like a weapon. "Look at him, just sitting there pretending to be the victim." I didn't move, didn't flinch. I let the silence hold him, let the contrast sharpen his sputtering chaos against my measured stillness. In that instant, I became what he could never be, composed, unshaken, dignified. The dining room had transformed into a courtroom, and Dylan's voice, once booming, now rang hollow against the walls. The jury of 8 shifted in their seats, their verdict already written across their faces. "Freeloader." My voice broke the silence, low but steady. I wasn't speaking to Dylan. I was speaking to them, the witnesses. "Dylan, remind our guests who pays for this house." His mouth opened, then shut. That's not important." I leaned back, my gaze sweeping across the table. "Who bought the food for tonight's dinner? Who pays the bills? The electricity, the heat, the water?" No one answered. No one had to. The evidence was obvious. I nodded toward Dylan's sneakers. "Those $300 shoes you're wearing, are those mine too?" His face went crimson. "Stop it." "The jeans, the watch, the groceries, 8 months of gas, insurance, utilities." My tone never rose. It didn't need to. "Shall I bring out the receipts?" He spun to the guests, arms flailing, desperate. "You don't understand. He controls everything." Mary set her glass down with surgical precision. "Dylan, whose name is on the deed?" His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "This is his house," Anne whispered, her eyes wide with the weight of realization. The room shifted then. Tom looked around, nodding slowly, as if the pieces had finally locked into place, and for the first time all night, Dylan looked small. The walls around us told their own quiet truth. Family photos, frame after frame, lined the hallway and dining room. Jasper and Margaret through the decades, smiling, aging, holding hands, their marriage etched into every corner of this house. The furniture bore the weight of years, the careful organization spoke of permanence, and the settled comfort of long habitation clung to every surface like dust. It was my house, my home, and it had been for decades. "How long have you been living here?" John asked suddenly. His tone was surgical in its simplicity, cutting through the evening like a scalpel through cloth. 8 months, I said before Dylan could spin another lie. Stella, standing just at the kitchen doorway, made a small sound, half gasp, half groan. "A couple of weeks, you said." Mary repeated slowly, her voice measured, each word heavy as lead. 8 months ago. The math did itself, and I watched the realization dawn in their faces. The guests exchanged glances, quick flickers of recognition that only couples married for decades could read. Anne's voice cut the silence, heavy with maternal disappointment. "Dylan," he tried to rally. "You don't understand the situation." His voice rose, sharp but hollow now, echoing in a room that had turned against him. "I understand perfectly," Tom said, his voice quiet but steady. He looked at me then, and I saw something like awe in his eyes. "You've been supporting them all this time." The silence that followed wasn't confusion anymore. It was comprehension. They looked at Dylan's expensive clothes with new eyes. They looked at the elaborate dinner with suspicion, and they noticed the careful way I moved around my own home. They saw the truth, piece by piece. "Those credit card bills you left on the counter," I continued, speaking now not to Dylan, but to the guests who deserved the truth. $12,000 in debt, while living here, eating my food, using my electricity. I saw the color drain from Dylan's face as each sentence pulled another brick from his fragile facade. "He makes us feel like children." Dylan tried again, desperate. "You're acting like children." Mary snapped, her voice carrying firm authority. "Adults pay their own way." The words struck Dylan like a physical blow. He staggered, his eyes darting between the faces that had begun the evening friendly and admiring, but now brimmed with disgust. John rose slowly, towering over the table with a quiet gravity. "I think we've heard enough." In that instant, the dining room stopped being a festive space. It had become a courtroom, and the jury had already delivered its verdict. Dylan's voice trembled as he whispered, "This isn't over," but the words had no weight. They hung in the air, fragile as smoke, and then he snapped. His chair screeched against the hardwood, the sound grating as glass on stone. He slammed his fists onto the oak table, rattling the silverware and sending wine trembling in their glasses. "Enough," he bellowed. The word echoed off the walls. Anne recoiled. Mary clutched her chest. Tom rose halfway from his seat, as though to shield her. Dylan pointed toward the staircase, voice cracking, "Go to your room, now." His finger shook as if he were a father disciplining a child. But I didn't move. I remained perfectly still, calm as stone in the candlelight. The contrast was brutal. His face red with fury, spittle at his lips, while I stood motionless, quiet, unbothered. The guests froze in their seats, bearing witness to a scene that no longer resembled family disagreement, but the unraveling of a man in public view. John tried to cut in gently. "Dylan, maybe you should." But Dylan spun on him, eyes wild, shouting, "You don't understand. I'm the one in charge here. This is my house." The words rang false, even to him. The lie collapsed before it left his mouth. Everyone knew better. "Dylan," Mary's voice softened, filled with concern. "Please, sit down." "I won't sit down in my own dining room," he barked, pacing now, fists clenched like an animal trapped in a cage. His face twisted as he spat the words. "He sits there acting innocent, but he controls everything. Every penny, every moment of our lives." Stella shifted, torn between loyalty to her husband and horror at the spectacle. Her eyes flicked to me, pleading silently for me to save him from himself. "He needs to learn respect." Dylan roared, his voice cracking. "Go upstairs." The silence that followed was deeper than before. It was the silence of 8 people holding their breath, waiting for judgment. I let it linger. I let the weight of his outburst settle in the room. Then I spoke, quiet, steady, final. You have until morning to move out. His mouth fell open. The pacing stopped. What? The word came out strangled. We're not going anywhere, he sputtered. You have until morning, I repeated, turning to face him at last. You can't make us leave, he cried. This is my house. The simplicity of it cut through everything. No theatrics, no explanations, just truth. His face shifted through emotions, shock, rage, disbelief, panic, all tangled into something pathetic. It's Christmas. We don't have anywhere to go. You should have thought of that, I said evenly, before you called me a freeloader in my own home. The words destroyed what was left of him. He looked to the guests for sympathy, but none met his eyes. Tom squeezed his wife's hand under the table. Mary pressed trembling fingers to her lips. Anne looked like she might cry. Please, Dylan begged, his voice breaking. Dad, please, we can talk about this. But I was already moving toward the staircase, my decision long made. The battlefield below would be nothing but ruins by morning. Until morning, I said again, not looking back. The silence stretched like held breath, broken only by Stella's sobs, as I ascended the creaking stairs. Christmas dinner was over, not even 8 o'clock, and Dylan's performance had collapsed into his complete undoing. In my bedroom, I shut the door with a soft click. I hung my jacket beside the suits I'd worn to Margaret's funeral, to Dylan's graduation, to countless birthdays and retirements. Shedding it felt symbolic, like stripping away a costume I'd never wanted to wear. The chair by the window welcomed me, an old friend. From here I watched headlights sweep across the snow as one by one the guests fled Dylan's wreckage. Tom's car, John and Mary's sedan, Anne hurrying back to her porch light across the street. The house grew quiet, save for muffled voices below. Dylan shouting, Stella pleading, something breaking in the kitchen. The kind of chaos that marked the death of a dream. 35 years I had waited for him to grow up. 35 years of excuses, shortcuts, debts, and second chances. Margaret had always believed in him, always said, give him time, he'll figure it out. But I had finally run out of time to give. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, steam rising in lazy curls, patient as I had been for 8 long months. But this morning my patience carried a different weight. This wasn't waiting born of endurance anymore. It was waiting with intent. Waiting for the inevitable confrontation I had already decided would end differently than all the ones before it. Dylan appeared at the bottom of the stairs, silk pajamas glimmering faintly in the gray morning light. Stella had bought them for his birthday, $70 pajamas, I remembered, because I'd seen the receipt crumpled on the counter months ago. His hair was mussed from sleep, but his posture radiated casual confidence, the easy arrogance of a man who thought storms always blew past if he ignored them long enough. Morning, Dad, he said, padding into the kitchen, his bare feet slapping against the tiles I had installed with my own hands 15 years ago. Coffee smells good. I watched as he poured himself a cup, choosing without hesitation the mug Margaret had painted in her ceramics class. The faded words, "World's best husband," looped across its side in her careful script. Another violation. Another small theft of something sacred. Sleep well? I asked finally, my voice even, controlled. Yeah, he said, leaning against the counter in that studied way of his, performing belonging. Last night got pretty heated, huh? You know how holidays can be. Everyone's stressed, emotions running high. He dismissed it so easily, like rewriting history was as simple as rearranging words in his mouth. To him, his public humiliation was nothing more than holiday stress, as trivial as an argument about football or dinner rolls. Pretty heated, I echoed, letting the words hang. Exactly. But it's Christmas morning. Well, the day after. He gestured lazily toward the living room where scraps of wrapping paper still littered the carpet, torn from gifts he'd bought with my money. Time to move past it. You know, family's family, that phrase. How many times had it been his shield? How many times had family's family been the excuse to drain me of money, of peace, of dignity? So everything's fine now? I asked, sipping my coffee, studying his face over the rim. Of course it's fine. Dylan settled into the chair across from me, his body language loose, confident, his tone dripping with the assurance of someone who had already decided that daylight had erased the consequences of the night before. We had a fight. Happens to everyone. Everything's fine now. I let him bask in his illusion for a beat, then dropped the truth into the space between us like a stone-shattering glass. Fine will be when you've moved out. His face flickered, just for an instant before he forced the mask back on. Dad, come on. You can't be serious about that deadline nonsense. I'm completely serious. He laughed then, but the sound was hollow, strained. It's been 14 hours? You really expect us to pack up our entire lives and find a new place overnight? I expected you to start packing last night. His laugh faltered, his voice sharpened, leaning on the familiar crutch of reason. Where exactly are we supposed to go? It's the day after Christmas. Nothing's open, nowhere to look for apartments. Be realistic here. I rose from the table, carrying my empty mug to the sink, the porcelain clinking softly as I set it down. Then I turned to face him fully, meeting his eyes with the weight of a man who had already decided. You had 8 months to make other arrangements. We've been trying. He shot back quickly, the lie slipping out smooth as silk practiced from use. You know we've been looking. The job market is brutal. Rent's insane. We just need more time. You've had time. The cracks began to show. His jaw tightened. His shoulders tensed. So what are you going to do if we don't leave? He demanded, a sneer curling at his lips. What's your big plan? I reached for the old phone on the wall, the same one that had hung there for 20 years, its plastic yellowed with age, but solid as stone. Dylan's eyes followed my hand, and for the first time his posture shifted. The confidence leaked away in tiny fractures, replaced by something smaller, sharper. You'll see, I said. Dad, this is ridiculous. But even as he protested, his voice rising in that familiar blend of arrogance and fear, I could see it in his eyes. He believed me. You can't make us leave. His voice cracked as the words rose, desperation bleeding through the thin veil of reason. We're family. My hand closed around the old phone receiver, cool plastic against my skin. Dylan's eyes locked on the movement, and I saw it then, the flicker of realization. The first time in months he understood that his polished lines, his practiced manipulations, weren't working anymore. The old patterns, guilt, obligation, Margaret's soft mercy, were gone. Stop, he said, quieter now, almost pleading. Just stop and think about this. I had been thinking about it. I had thought about it every day for 8 months. I had thought about it all night after Christmas dinner imploded in front of 8 witnesses. The time for thinking was over. The police arrived in exactly 23 minutes, faster than I expected for what they'd call a civil matter. 2 officers, one young, sharp haircut, jaw tight with the stiffness of training, the other older, slower in movement, the kind of calm presence you only earn after decades of domestic disputes and family messes. Sir, we received a call about a property dispute, the older one said from my porch, notepad in hand. Professional. Yes, but not unkind. Yes, officer, I replied evenly. I need assistance removing unauthorized occupants from my home. I handed him the folder I'd spent the night assembling. Deed, mortgage statements, utility bills, insurance records, every page stamped with my name, my wife's name, our life carved into paper and ink. Dylan's name was nowhere. Behind me I heard the shuffle of bare feet on hardwood. Dylan stepped into the hallway in those damned silk pajamas, his face pale, his confidence finally leaking away. Officer, this is crazy, he said, forcing a laugh that carried no strength. This is my father. We had a family argument, that's all. The younger officer flipped through my documents, while his partner listened with the patience of a man who had seen sons try to charm their way out of harder truths. Property ownership isn't complicated, I heard him murmur. Either your name's on the papers, or it isn't. Sir, the older officer asked, eyes steady on me. Are you the sole owner of this property? Yes. My late wife and I bought this home in 1987. It's been paid off for 12 years. These individuals were temporary guests. That arrangement ended last night. I asked them to leave by this morning. They refused. The two officers exchanged one of those wordless looks that comes only from years working together. A whole conversation in a flick of the eyes. "Sir," the older one turned to Dylan, his tone clipped, professional, final. "You need to gather your belongings and leave the premises. This is insane." Dylan shouted, voice cracking. "He can't just kick us out. We've been here for 8 months. The property owner has the right to remove unauthorized occupants." The officer replied flatly, "You have no lease, no rental contract. That means no tenancy rights. You need to leave." A sound from the stairs. Stella, draped in a bathrobe worth more than my monthly electric bill, her face swollen from crying, mascara streaked like war paint. She didn't argue. She didn't posture. She just asked quietly, "How long do we have?" "I'd recommend you gather essential items now," the officer told her. "You can arrange for the rest later." The next hour moved like clockwork. Dylan flailed between fury and bargaining, but the badge wasn't something he could charm, bully, or guilt. Under watchful eyes, 8 months of slow invasion was undone in 60 minutes. Boxes carried down the stairs, suitcases dragged across the floor, Stella scooping cosmetics into bags, Dylan cursing under his breath, and the neighborhood watched. They always do. Mrs. Henderson, 3 houses down, walked her dog past my driveway twice, pausing just long enough to confirm details she'd feed into the grapevine. Curtains shifted, porch lights clicked on, Christmas morning spectacle served cold. When the last box hit the trunk of their car, Dylan turned to me, his face contorted with rage and humiliation, the silk pajamas hanging awkwardly in the daylight. "This isn't over," he hissed, voice low but venomous. "You think you've won something here, but this isn't over." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The empty driveway, the police cars, the neighbors watching through glass, everything already had. The threat lingered in the winter air like frost-clouded breath, but stripped of its force in the shadow of police authority and the weight of signed documents. I didn't flinch. I didn't need to. "Have a safe trip, son," I said, steady and unshaken, watching as their car rolled back down my driveway. Dylan pressed the accelerator too hard, the engine growling like some final act of rebellion, but the gesture was hollow, impotent, fury without teeth. The officers stayed a while longer, professional and methodical, finishing their paperwork at my dining table, as if they had done this 1,000 times before. They spoke in calm, measured tones, explaining restraining orders, boundaries, the ways to ensure peace if harassment continued. They treated me not as a bitter old man or an angry father, but simply as what I was, the rightful owner reclaiming what had always been mine. And then, when their cruiser finally turned the corner and vanished from sight, the house breathed again. For the first time in 8 long months, silence filled the rooms, but it wasn't the suffocating silence I had grown used to, the silence of tension, of unwelcome guests whispering in corners. This silence was alive, expansive, almost radiant. I stood still for a moment, my eyes sweeping across the wreckage of Christmas dinner, stained napkins, abandoned plates, ribbons and paper from gifts purchased with my money, but none of it mattered anymore. They were gone. On the coffee table lay one final trace of Dylan, his expensive watch carelessly forgotten, gleaming in the afternoon light, a watch that probably cost more than most people earned in a week. I picked it up, heavy and cold in my palm, and for a brief second, I thought about keeping it, about pocketing it as interest on the months of exploitation and lies. But I didn't want it. I didn't need it. Instead, I carried it to the front door, opened it wide and placed the watch on the porch. If he wanted it badly enough, he could return for it, but he would no longer cross my threshold to claim it. The sunlight poured through the windows, warming the wooden floors I had walked 1,000 times, floors I no longer had to justify stepping on. The rooms belonged to me again. The walls, the air, even the quiet hum of the refrigerator, all of it mine, all of it untangled from his presence. The silence wasn't empty, it brimmed with possibility, with the slow unfurling of peace I had almost forgotten how to imagine. Tomorrow, I would begin the work of repairing what they had broken. Tonight, I would do something simpler, something rarer. I would sit in my home, in my chair, in the life that was once again mine, and finally breathe.